Welcome back to week 2 of our PD series here at Attollo. Today we have Stephen Schedler with us. He's currently the executive director at Good Samaritan Center. He received his bachelor's degree in psychology from Penn State University. He then received his MSW at Temple University. Currently he works as a counselor at Good Samaritan, executive director, and as an adjunct professor at Messiah University. He also serves as a board member for the nonprofit Elizabethtown community that cares with the lovely Gail, who we actually met a few weeks ago. We had lunch with the beautiful woman. He also serves as a board member of the Goal Project. So thank you for being with us here today, Stephen. If you could start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, just about where you grew up, and a little bit about your upbringing. We would love to hear that.
Sure. And I'm going to share a couple things real quick. One, just for clarity, because my organization is a little bit sensitive about our name sometimes, because there's a few Samaritans out in the world. We are the Samaritan Center.
Okay.
So Good Samaritan is a different, right? So we're Samaritan Center, also known as Samaritan Counseling Center.
Okay.
So just to clear that up. And Attollo, I'm going to share real quick how I know about you guys. Is that okay? Can I share about that? So you mentioned Elizabethtown. So you all know Gail a little bit, who is, I've known for many years and is just a really neat person and a leader in our community. So I got to partner with her a little bit at times. And she helped, I think, kind of, if that's fair to say, helped bring Attollo to E-Town. And that maybe wasn't the easiest thing in the world. It's not always, imagine this, it's not always easy to change how things are done and to do new things, right? So she doesn't care she just goes for it, right? And that's what leaders do sometimes. We go for it. And she helped bring Attollo there. So I got to be a part of, there's a process that your students go through to graduate. And there's community members that sometimes are part of that process, right? So years ago, I don't know, who knows, 5, 6 years ago, something like that, I was a part of that at E-Town. And so I was with some students, with other community members, and we got to see the cube, and they got to answer some questions and this and that. So it was really a blessing to be a part of that process that day. So
that's so exciting.
Yeah, yeah. And then I can share a little bit about my journey. That's kind of was the basic premise there. And if it's okay, can I be a little bit vulnerable with you guys today?
Absolutely, we welcome that.
So I'll get a little bit deeper with this group, and that ties into the why am I even doing any of this stuff at all, right? Yes. So I'll try to share that. So grew up in Pennsylvania, and we're kind of rural Pennsylvania, mountains right near the Appalachian Trail, really beautiful, but not a lot going on per se at times for growing up. If you're a kid in in high school, this and that, don't have an amazing community like we do here. So I was in that situation. And part of my journey was that during that time, I got really curious about using drugs and getting high and stuff like that. So that became a big part of my journey. When I was in high school, I made some really risky choices. And it was during that time that I kind of lost myself a bit. And I didn't know what was going to happen or where I was going to go. And I had, when I was a senior in high school, what I would say a moment of clarity. So I had a moment in time where I saw where I was going and what was going on in my life, and I was feeling anxious, feeling depressed, not knowing what I was doing, and I caught a glimpse of hope somehow that things didn't have to be that way and things could be different for me. So that started my journey out of that whole situation, and I was able to get into college and start my journey that led me to today, where I've worked in human services really my whole career. But that's one of the things I share when I'm talking about stuff like this. If you're thinking about working with kids or adults or being in human services or mental health or drug and alcohol or whatever it is, what's our why? Why are we doing that? Why are we getting up and doing this work, right? Because there might be, if you do this work, you might not end up with a yacht at the end of the day. You might not end up with a mansion at the end of the day. So what are we doing? Why are we doing this? So that's being a little bit vulnerable with you guys and sharing some of my why. Is I was at a point in my life where I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know where I was going to go. and was able to catch a glimpse of hope and start moving in a different direction that led me to this point today. So that's my why. My why that I get up and do this work is that I truly believe that no matter what's going on in someone's life, it can be different, it can be better, right? And there's hope. So that's kind of something that I care about a lot, right?
Yeah.
So from that, I got to take advantage of opportunities after I kind of had that moment of change and was able to get into college and start my journey to get my bachelor's and then later my master's and get in and do this work. So it's been a long road, but I'm glad to be here.
I love that. Thank you for sharing. I definitely do agree. Things like social work and education, those are from the passion, from the heart. We definitely don't get into it for the money, but I think the reward comes from those experiences and those people that we get to help. So I definitely resonate with that so deeply. But thank you for sharing your story and being vulnerable. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
So curious if there was ever a mentor that guided you that you would credit to your journey through those trials and tribulations that you mentioned.
Yeah, I've had different important people, I would say, along the way. I'm going to highlight a little bit later in my journey, if that's okay, for this part. Because a big part of my journey ended up being learning how to lead and learning about leadership. So, and I had no plans that was going to be a piece of the puzzle. I was just, trying to do the next right thing. But in that, I was working, when I got my bachelor's and got out for the first job out, I was working kind of on the front lines of intense mental health work with kids. So this is residential treatment for kids that are really struggling behaviorally. So it's kind of residential treatment is kind of the end of the line in the child and adolescent system. Like if you can't function in school, at home, behaviors are really out of control, there's this thing called residential treatment. And the concept is you're going to get 8 to 10 kids that are really struggling and have them live together. And then you're going to staff it. And it's going to go good. Well, guess what? That's not easy stuff. So here I was just out, first job, working front lines, evening shift every other weekend, doing this thing, and just trying to do the best I could every day. And our director, for whatever reason, ended up approaching me after a few years and asked me to take a different role. And then he asked me to take another role. And then he asked me to be a director, a program director. And so he was one of my key mentors early in my walk of being a professional. Just like his servant leadership, how he led with humility, how he was supportive, calm. I mean, in the chaos of whatever was going on, the guy was a rock. He was a rock. You felt safe to be around him. So I had never really seen myself as being a leader per se, especially coming out of some of the things that I was into when I was younger and trying to figure out even who I was. But he's someone that, for whatever reason, saw something in me and gave me opportunity and really modeled, I think, a way to be a leader that maybe you don't always see portrayed in popular culture or things like that. But that's someone that really sticks out to me.
Okay. Well, thank you. So here at Attollo, we work with 17 and 18-year-olds. I know you know a little bit about us. We're interested in going to college, trade school, or even joining the military. If you could give your 18-year-old self one piece of advice, what would it be?
Oh man, I would sit down. I would need like a whole weekend probably, or a week, just to say, yeah, we gotta sit down. We gotta talk. Like, you almost jacked your whole life up here, guy. You need to slow down. So I don't know. If I could go, I would say really that conversation, if I could go back, I would have with my 14-year-old self.
Ooh, okay.
My 14-year-old self is the one I really needed to sit down with and say, whoa, time out here, guy. You need to slow down. And I didn't really have a mentor at times per se in that part of my life, then I really could have used one. So I don't know how you find that as a young person. You guys kind of fill that space a little bit, right? You guys fill that space. You are that. There's a low percentage of kids that probably do. I mean, some have amazing parents, but that is not a given, you know. And I love, you know, I've made total amends with everybody, and I love my mom and dad, and but that just wasn't the space that they were in. They weren't in a position to understand, relate, guide, lead a teenager through to the next phase of life. It just wasn't a part of their wheelhouse, you know. And so I would want to go back to that period in time, have that 14-year-old slow down, and think farther ahead than the next day, than the next week, and really try to, you know, those years go so fast, and they're game-changing years, You know, take advantage in a positive way of that time. You have the blessing of time, but it's going to go, and you can change the trajectory of your life in that window. I very strongly believe that from, you know, say 8th grade to 12th grade to me is so key. And that's some of that, like, you guys are doing it. You're there. You're in that space. And it's incredible. So thank you all for what you do.
Thank you. How have your values influenced your professional direction?
Yeah, I think very much so. I mean, it ties into a couple things. It ties into that why, you know, why get up and why do this. You know, this work is not easy. This work of human services, just in general. You know, not everything works out. Not everybody makes it. There's challenges. There's times, depending on the organization, the finances are really tough to figure out. How do you help people and make the math work? So this work is not for the faint of heart. So, you know, I think the why, and then, you know, I think about what I mentioned a little bit too of that gentleman that really, you know, modeled leadership and how important that was and how formative that was. So some of that together, you know, is, I think, significant.
Would you feel comfortable sharing your most recent moment where you let out a sigh of relief and you kind of remember, like, this is why I do this work? Would you feel comfortable sharing that?
Yeah, I think so. I got to work with a client over the span of, say, 4 to 5 years. This was a teen. I got this young person when they were 14. And this is my counselor hat. So I wear different hats. I still counsel. I carry a caseload today. So I got to see this young person over the span of 4 to 5 years, and they had gone through a really challenging situation with their family, and we got to work through all these different themes in his life of finding his voice, being able to share, learn, like, be real about his emotions and share it with others, and so I got to see that young person build bridges back with his mom and dad, understand himself emotionally, share his emotions with others, important people in his life that he had. It's hard to talk to the people that we're closest to. Mom, dad, other important people. Sometimes that's the hardest conversations to have. So I got to see him, like, literally step out and be vulnerable and have those conversations. So that work and that span time with that particular person, and I got to see that person go to college. They got accepted, went to college, they're in college, you know. So just that, you know, really is an example of something that really grounds me into, you know, why do this work.
I love that. I think that's great. That why is very important. I think I'm thinking back to, like, when I was teaching English at the local high school, and, like, for me, my why, even on my hardest day, was like that image of seeing my students cross the stage and get their diplomas. So I'm always so curious how other people kind of push through those hard times. So thank you for sharing that. Considering the work you're doing at the Goal Project, How do you help faith-based communities balance spiritual support with evidence-based approaches to education?
Yeah, so goal's an interesting piece of the puzzle. I did just wrap up with them not too long ago, just very, very recently, but I got to serve on their board for multiple years. So the premise would be that faith communities are uniquely positioned to be involved in people's lives. You know, for a lot of folks, and we live in an area where faith is really important to a lot of people, so there was often an opportunity to maybe for the faith communities to engage folks around issues of recovery, but they didn't have the language, they didn't know how to go about it, probably maybe felt uncomfortable maybe with the topic and this and that. So some of the work that organization has done over the years is kind of partly to normalize the conversation around addiction. You know, that, hey, this isn't some, scary thing that we have to, avoid and pretend it's not there. You know, let's be real about it. Let's just talk about it. That this impacts people's lives. It's impacted a lot of individuals' families, so let's be real about it and then be proactive and be productive in our conversation. So the premise would be to kind of help with having the conversations, how to initiate it, how to do it well, and how to help people find support, things like that. So equipping faith communities around some of that. So there's a lot of work to be done around that. And I think every faith community has an opportunity to grow in how they communicate about addiction and mental health issues and equip themselves to be more helpful at times and just to be more effective in that space.
Awesome. No, I definitely do understand that. How do you make sure the initiatives are inclusive and sensitive to the diverse needs of those they serve?
Yeah, well, I think at this point, Lancaster, are folks here from Lancaster County to a large extent? Yeah. So I'm a transplant. I'm not from this area, but now I've worked in and around for 20 plus years. Lancaster County is, I think, a little unique in some ways. It's really a melting pot. It's really cool. I think the diverse cultures that are interwoven in this and that. I grew up in an area that wasn't diverse at all. So that's one of the things I really enjoy about living here and such. So I think there's so many opportunities to engage that work. And Goal as an organization at this point has a big focus on Hispanic churches, and Latin background churches. So we have multiple members that really, really passionate about that and come from those backgrounds and work intimately, with faith communities and such. So it's a great melting pot, I think, that we have here. And if so, I don't know, it's possible that folks that are from here maybe, it'd be easy to take for granted maybe the unique environment we have and how supportive this is too for nonprofit work, which is a whole other kind of conversation and dynamic. But Lancaster County in a lot of ways is very giving and very supportive of organizations that are doing all kinds of really great work. And you guys have experienced that certainly as well. So that's pretty cool.
Yeah, thank you. What advice would you give us if we were looking out for signs in a student or a scholar that would warrant extra support or maybe connecting them with something like the services that you guys offer?
Yeah, I think something that sticks out is a change in attitude, a change in behavior. So if you've known that person long enough, hopefully you've kind of seen their baseline, and if you see that shift, that my kind of curiosity really goes up. And this is not easy either. And I'm a dad, and when I have my dad hat on, I am not an expert. I'm trying to figure it out. I'm trying to figure out, what am I doing with here? Holy cow. So it stretches me and challenges me, every week. So anything that I've ever learned, is meager, really, when you're in the nitty-gritty with your own family, with your own loved ones, with my own kids. So that happens, where they're presenting differently, and I get worried a little bit. And then I have to kind of manage my own anxiety a little bit at that point. But I'm starting to lean in and like ask, more questions and try to connect. And it's not easy to connect with, is it just automatically easy to connect with young people?
No.
Does that take time?
Yeah.
Does that take
Not
time?
at all. It takes us about 6 weeks.
And even your own kids, I have to keep recalibrating. They keep changing.
I know.
They keep changing. So, like, what worked in the past doesn't work anymore. I've got to start over. So I'm taking my son out. I try to take him out. Right now, I've taken him out the last few years. Him and I go out for his birthday, just father-son time. So we're doing that on Saturday. And he's kind of on my radar a little bit. And I'm going to try. I felt like we had a good conversation a week or two ago. But I still feel like I need to press in a little harder and just see where he's at on some things. But yeah, it's not easy. But I try to be aware of those shifts and I want to know, because I was largely growing up in that span of time was probably pretty alone. There was nobody really checking in. There wasn't anyone really checking in.
So definitely making sure we stay on top of checking in with them and things like that.
Yeah.
I think that's a great.
Yeah, show that care, that concern, that interest, even if they feign that I don't even want to talk about it. You're still bringing that care. You're still bringing that concern. It's not based on their reaction, because they're teenagers. They might not act like they care what you're going to say, but I think usually they do care.
Yeah.
Do care. That care and concern and that presence is meaningful in a deep way. So don't be discouraged if the response doesn't line up with what you're trying to bring to the table. Just bring that that care and concern and that attention, right? That there's going to be good seeds planted from that, hopefully.
I love that. I'm curious. I just would love to hear a little bit more about your sons. Maybe your other son. A little bit about your dynamic with them.
Yeah, I have a son and a daughter.
I'm sorry. I thought it was 2 boys.
So eighth grade is my daughter's in 8th grade. My son, I'm sorry. Let me speak correctly. My daughter's in 5th grade. My son's in 8th grade.
Okay.
He's going to be going into high school then coming up. So one of the things with parent, if you're as being a parent, and this is I'm not saying anything revolutionary here, but man, your kids are going to be different. Oh my goodness, they are so different. And I think that's one of the challenges of being a parent, is to dial in that care and concern and support for human beings that are potentially totally opposite. And that's kind of what we have. We have drastically different personalities, strengths, cares, concerns. They couldn't be any more different. So part of our journey with them is them just learning to be kind with each other a little bit. Because my daughter, for instance, like she is not really into academics, or it's just not her wheelhouse. She's very creative, very artistic, things like that. Her brother is a sponge. He has like total recall. School for him is like, he barely has to show up and he gets, straight A's. Mm-hmm. For her, it's like she has to be dialed in and work to get C's, and she's intimidated by him in that way, right? Because we look at it's, that's the way our society is structured a lot of times. If you excel in certain ways, like school captures a certain type of like intelligence and ability, right? It's not the full spectrum of what, matters or what, is significant or important, but our society, tends to, well, there's grades, it grades people. Like you're better if you're, good at certain things, right? So for her, part of her journey is to come into peace with herself and what her strengths are. And so I'm trying to help my son too understand, because he gets really frustrated. They don't often, connect really that well. But I'm trying to help him understand on a little deeper level why, she's kind of intimidated by him, and how that could impact, how he is with her. Could he bring some compassion to the table with her? Could he be, a mentor, someone to lift her up? Can we, as a family, lift each other up? Can we, instead of competing with each other, can we lift each other up? Can we do that? I'm working on it. I haven't figured it out yet. Goodness.
Oh, I love that. So pivoting a little, the field of counseling is always evolving. What are some emerging trends that you're excited about in your professional world?
Yeah, who knows where this is going to go. I think we're really still scratching the surface in a lot of ways. We have a long way to go. We really do. Are we better than we were 30 years ago? Maybe. I think the trend line might increase as we keep going along here over the next 10, 20 years. I think that the trend line of understanding and ability to impact wellness in diverse ways has the potential to really increase more at a faster rate than maybe it has even in these last 20 years. We shall see. Something that's intriguing, I think, for the field, and this isn't brand new stuff per se, but it's still stuff trickles out in the field very slowly, and such. But moving, like some people benefit from talk therapy, and it can be life-changing, and people should definitely, it's worth looking into and this and that. But I have clients at times where that's just not going to hit it. That's not going to be enough for them to have the catharsis that's needed for them to make the next step in their human journey. So some of the modalities that go beyond just talking, and some of these we're learning more about why they work and things like that, but there's techniques that a lot of people have heard of now, kind of EMDR, for instance, is an example, the eye movement desensitization and reprocessing, where you're going back through and reprocessing aspects of your life, but also incorporating this dynamic that's beyond just talk. You're doing you're incorporating the brain, the bilateral processing of the brain, and some of these modalities seem to allow, some people have heard of the body keeps the score, this and that. Some of these newer modalities seem to allow, particularly trauma, that's being held by the conscious and the unconscious in the body and is, impacting life in all these different ways, to have more of a release than just straight up talk therapy. So I think it's important for us to keep learning about that. I really look at things through a trauma lens. So I'm a big proponent of being trauma informed, understanding what trauma does to the brain, helping people. I do a lot of psychoed around trauma, helping people understand, okay, why am I so defensive in relationship? Why am I so cut off from other human beings? Why am I not letting love in and out of my life? Mm-hmm. Well, it makes sense. And I have a whiteboard when I'm doing this stuff, and I draw the pictures and try to make it as simple as possible. But I try to do a lot of psychoed just to help people understand what's going on with yourself. And knowledge is power. If you understand what's going on, well, then we have a chance here to move forward. But so I'm a big proponent for the field to keep growing around understanding trauma, the ripples of trauma, how to treat trauma. And I think we can go a long way to helping our society and our culture continue to grow, and to be a culture that's supportive in many, many, many different ways. We have a long way to go. We have a long way to go with all that. But I think that's a goal, would be that in general we have a culture that is understanding of the trials and tribulations of life and is supportive in moving forward together, right? Sometimes I share this little, kind of just to change people's perspective a little bit, I'll say something like, we're on a giant rock flying through outer space. Things can get a little hectic. But it's pretty wild if you think about it. Like, you're just two human beings, you know what happened, and then a kid shows up, and whoa, they don't know what they're doing. And they're supposed to lead this little human being into being like this amazing human being. Mm-hmm. And all the different things that happen as we are rotating through space. What the heck? It's amazing that anything good happens. It's pretty wild, So I just to normalize a little bit the craziness of the world that we live in, right? How is this even possible? How did this happen? That we're breathing something we can't see. Our hearts are pumping. There's blood going through our bodies. It's just insane. So yeah, it's complex. But at the same time, life can be amazing. And so how do we walk in that? And not in the fear and the anxiety. Because I can certainly understand why the world is fear and anxiety producing, right? But, at the same time, how do we thrive? how do we, walk in the good things of the world and of life, right? That's what we're trying to figure out.
That was beautiful. I love that. Like, I could visualize actually flying on a rock right now.
We're going.
And I'm like, I'm on it. I'm ready.
We're going.
I am.
We're going. Hang on, people.
Yeah.
Hang on.
It's like, what if we turned off gravity right now, guys? You brought up the point about trauma-informed care.
Yeah.
And I was curious if you had 2, maybe 3 just small pointers that within the work that we do, we could implement into our connections or our everyday experiences with students that would essentially just make us better mentors.
Yeah. I think when you get into doing trauma work, and particularly depending on how far your organization is to caring about that work, it starts with us. So do we understand ourselves? Do we understand our defenses? Do we understand what triggers us? What triggers our fear, our anxiety, our worry? And are we self-aware? And then if we are self-aware, how do we manage that? And how do we understand that, right? So, because I think there's this common humanity that we have, right? That we all are experiencing these things. We all are triggered into times of fear and anxiety and worry and doubt and this and that, right? So there's this common humanity. And then for folks that have really been through a lot, maybe big T or little t traumas, there's this extra layer of defense to protect the deep self. I call it the deep self, to protect this inner core that's potentially vulnerable and could be hurt. So I think it starts with our own journeys of understanding those dynamics in ourselves, and then we can be in a position to be supportive to others, because we're gonna be ready. We're gonna know that there's time. Hey, I'm getting triggered here. This is really hitting me. What's going on? To have that self-awareness and then work through it, and then be in a position to be supportive to others in the journey around all of that.
Awesome. So you brought up that burnout. So my next question actually leads into that. So burnout and vicarious trauma are significant in both of our lines of work, if we're being honest. How do you personally manage both the vicarious trauma, and how do you practice self-care?
Yeah, well, we could spend a whole time just talking about this. So it's really important. And self-care is a word that's thrown around a lot. It can may become a little cliched, but I think as each person needs to find what is going to be real for you. What do you look forward to? What gets you dialed in? Out of your, if you have a worried mind, if you have a mind that ruminates and can worry, what gets you in the flow out of that space and into a different space? Where's your flow? Where's your passion? What gets you excited? And you have to be proactive about it. So it's both. Like, some people first don't have the self-awareness, so I don't know. They've never cultivated their interests. When I was coming out of my time of, being in addiction and just starting my recovery journey, that was something that I really tried to dial in on, as I realized, I need to cultivate interests. I need to find things that really get me going in a good way, right? Because I had to kind of start over. What I was doing was artificial and fake and damaging, and I had to what is going to be real and healthy and set me up for to be well as a human being, and dial into those things. So for me, just to be personal about it, part of my journey because when you're coming, a lot of times in early recovery, you're doing this, I had to cut ties with every single person that I hung out with. For an 18-year-old, that's, it kind of lonely. It was lonely. I wasn't hanging out with anybody. There's no one I could call because they were all doing their thing. What am I going to? So I started playing guitar. And I got a job, I was working, and then I started to just build from there. But it started just with some simple things. But a lot of what I found in those early days when I was 18, 19, 20 have carried on. So for me, being in the outdoors is healing. So I've got to make time to be out there. I got to do some hikes. I got to be in the canoe. I got to be out where there's nothing going on except some birds, some loons calling, and the birds chirping and the water lapping up on the boat. For me, that's flow. I can be in a different space there. That's real for me. I don't know what's real for you. You got to figure that out. You got to go on that journey, you know. The guitar was a big part of my life for a long time. Just doing it, on my own, learning, growing in that. But that would allow me to invest some time into something that ended up being meaningful in my life. Ended up having some neat friendships from that. Then, so, and then connecting. What does it mean to connect with others? Where there's key relationships, in investing in those key relationships. So, yeah, self-care. I think find what's real for you and do it. Invest in it. Care about it. Be passionate about it. Be passionate about your own well-being.
Thank you. Yeah, I think for me it was painting. So I am not good by any means of the imagination. My favorite thing to do was to take off my glasses and paint what I would see so that people could see what I could see without my glasses on. And I think it was insane because it was blurry, right? But it is healing, especially when you're trying to. So I do agree. Not the outdoors for me. I don't like bugs.
There can be some of those.
How do you encourage young professionals who are dealing in careers of direct services to deal with students who are like in the depths of trauma, right? Outside of, I know you mentioned, just being caring and concerned. When should we step in and do more if they don't have that support at home? I'm just curious.
Yeah, I think a lot of young people that have these challenging backgrounds and experiences, many can benefit from talking to somebody from a professional perspective, someone that understands it and can walk with them from that part of the job. I think that is something that's significant, and I think you all can do a lot and set that stage where that person has a chance, to move forward. And then what are the other supports going to be? Maybe there's some other ones that are going to tie into their personal journey. But just being aware of what's available, and giving that support, and at times maybe even having, if you've built that rapport, being able to have, conversations about what some options are. And what are some ways to get more support if that person needs that?
What words would you offer a student who is interested in going into the behavioral health career path?
Yeah, I think some of what I've started out with is, what's your why? Do you understand that? Are you dialed into that? Are you ready to be dialed into that? And I think a lot of people in the field, you maybe even use the language of have a calling, like they have a calling. I think that's another way to say it, is they really feel something from deeper than just the intellect, something from the spirit or the soul, however you want to say it. They feel some unction, some drive that this is, I'm going to give my life to something that's meaningful to me, and I want to impact other people's lives in that way, and to be dialed into that. I think that's key. I've encountered people that maybe didn't totally have that, and then would get disillusioned maybe with the field or different aspects of the field at times. Because again, if you're signing up for, this is just not easy stuff. And you mentioned the vicarious trauma and burnout and this and that. That's real, and for a lot of years, I was in leadership on the front lines in addiction treatment, and it's kind of cliched, but talk about burnout in that part of the field. It's real. I enjoyed switching things up after 10 plus years, working with a little different group of folks, and for me that was kind of healing in a little bit of a way, But yeah, coming in that setting, coming in every day and seeing, the challenges of relapse and this and that. So you can definitely find yourself in aspects, in places in the field that are legit, really, really challenging, and then that's part of our personal journeys then too, is knowing, well, maybe it's time that I switch things up a little bit. And that's okay. That's okay too. So you don't have to stay in the exact same spot the whole time. You're not going to maybe stay in the same spot 30 years, and that's okay too. you can maybe have impact in a little different angle in a different spot of the field too. So.
Awesome. Thank you. So at this time, I'm actually going to open the floor up for questions from our audience. Does anyone have any questions?
You talked about like finding your why a lot. What advice would you give to someone who hasn't found their why yet?
Yeah, I think engaging some type of a journey of self-awareness, of introspection, of and studying. I think studying leadership opens up a lot of these conversations in general. And leadership has nothing to do with titles, right? There's some people in this room that have titles that you kind of like already associate them with being a leader, right? And they're probably really good at it, but really leadership is a part of life, no matter what your title is. Like you have the opportunity to have influence in this and that, right? So there's so much good material on leadership that ties into these conversations too about, meaning and purpose and all this and that. So just engaging some type of journey of trying to get to know yourself and be real about it. So I think that work is really vital in our human journey, really, regardless of where you're at. It's like, have you had the chance to take the time to do some of that, right? And that's where kind of addiction is something that forces people into that journey in a way, right? So not everyone's been forced into that journey, so they maybe haven't taken the time and put the passion into some of that work. But you could choose to do that. You could choose to go deep in that way. So.
I have a question. I'll ask two rapid fire questions, then I have a couple. This is intriguing. Great job. Thank you so much for being here.
Mm-hmm.
So two rapid fire questions. One is just, you mentioned leadership material. What are one or two books or pieces of material that come to mind for the group?
Yeah, there's so much. One of the books that I've tried to help someone take a look at in recent times was one of the Maxwell's 5 Levels of Leadership. 5 Levels. So that kind of looks a little bit of through the different phases where maybe you're like really bringing some good stuff to the table and someone recognizes that and wants to give you a title. Yep. Well, that means almost nothing. It means that you've gotten recognized, which is great, but there's so much more to the journey. Like there's so much more to the journey, and
that's great. The second, could you just define big T and little t trauma?
Indeed. So a lot of times when we say trauma, people are thinking about these big heavy hitters. I call them big T traumas. They're thinking about the physical abuse, the sexual abuse, the neglect, the war vets, combat vets, this and that. There's no doubt. I mean, we know like that. But then there's tons of other things, and people that vary in resilience, right? So what impacts one person's life, someone else maybe navigates and transcends and does their own journey and comes back. But there's plenty. Like divorce is really common. Some kiddos navigate that and come through and learn from it, and da-da-da-da. Other kids, that's a game changer. And it really shatters a part of their being and triggers the whole trauma defense system, triggers the inability to let love in and out again because I'm defending myself, right? Mm-hmm. So it's important to be sensitive in the work and understanding resilience and that people are different and different things are going to impact people differently, and what's a trauma for one person maybe isn't for another, and really dialing into the specifics of that person's journey and understanding what maybe impacted that.
And so the last part of that question is that how do you encourage, how do you, honor might be the wrong word, but how do you honor the trauma or acknowledge the trauma without people living in it? And not that in some cases can be kind of a safe place for people to go because A, it can be an excuse as to why maybe we don't do other things or what have you. How do you find that right balance with people?
Yeah, I think the simple answer on that is I do when I'm, and this is when I have my counselor hat on and I'm engaged with them in that space. I do a lot of psychoeducation. I try to empower them, like understanding there's certain when there's a trauma, whether it's big T or little t, doesn't matter. It's what's real for that person. There's a pattern of things that happen that's consistent over most people's experiences at a basic level. These the nature of the defense system that springs up automatically. And that's beyond your conscious thought. You don't have to consciously think, oh, I need to have this powerful way to protect myself against being hurt at a deep level, right? That it happens. It's built into us as human beings, right? It's protective, right? It's designed to be protective, but the rub is that same thing prevents us from fully being alive, right? Because you kind of are living in a version of a prison, in a sense, is one way to say it, right? You're limited in your ability to thrive as a human being because you're so much energy is going just to protect the deep self, right?
Yeah. Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, I have so many questions, but I'll just start with one in case other people, want to ask questions. My first one is, you talked about being in the outdoors and not something healing for you. Do you feel as though, I can't read my own handwriting. Do you feel as though that is something that has resurfaced from your childhood living near Appalachia, or that it's kind of like this concept of your inner child resurfacing after tending to the trials and tribulations that you talked about?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I'm, I'm getting emotional almost here out of the blue. But yeah, we might, my mom and dad are going through a lot, and they can't live where I grew up anymore. They built the little house, but they built it and loved it and cared for it, and it was right by I could ride my bike to the Appalachian Trail. We were right there as a state forest and this and that. So a lot of my early memories are just like playing up in there, like building dams in the creeks, going to the little parks that were all up around there, mountain biking up the mountains and this and that. So those were like really primal experiences for me. And we're actually going to have to sell their house. And so we won't have a foothold there anymore. So I've just, yeah, it's there's some things like that. Each of us has something like that, right? That's like, whoa, that's a little deeper. That's a little, So yeah, I think that's true for me, and so yeah, when I'm out in those spaces, it's significant.
Anyone else have other questions?
Yeah, I have a question. Laura asked, how your values kind of affected your professional world and all of that, and I was curious, along with your values and all that, your personality and your skills, because counseling is such I've heard a lot of people say you have to have really good listening skills or just certain skills to be able to deal with the hardships of everyone else. And I'm just curious, did you develop those skills? Did they come along, or did you, just know in yourself, no, this is something I can do,
Yeah, that's great. That's a good one. So yeah, I'm naturally an introvert. I'm a slow and internal processor, and have I can flow with being out in space. I'm out in space here, right, with you guys, right? So I can flow in being out in space and kind of a quote-unquote extroverted type of situation, but the core of my being is introverted. That's part of that being out in nature, right? That replenishes me. I have to replenish, right, at times. So that core part of my being, I think, does lend itself a little bit to, dialing in as a listener. I'm perfectly comfortable going to that space. I don't have to talk all the time. But counseling skills can definitely be honed and learned and refined. So I love having diverse teams. And I think people have a misconception that a bulk of people that go into counseling are extroverts. They're not. They're not at all. My team, I want everybody on that team, all different, things going on. And I do have some extroverts on that team, but they really stick out. They really stick out. Their energy is just different. And I love it. I'd like to hire some more of those. Love that energy. Love it. It's vital. It's vital to a great counterpart to the introverted energy that a lot of folks bring to the table. But for me, that is a part of it. I'm perfectly content to dial in, but I'm always refining those skills, those listening skills. And I try to help. That's one of the big things when I work with couples, is getting people to powerfully listen to the other human being. Where you have no agenda, you're not trying to defend yourself, You're not trying to explain anything. You're not trying to do anything but deeply understand that other person. That's it. That's it. And even as counselors, we have to continually refine, and because usually in conversations, normally we're thinking through what we're going to say. Our brains are processing, and that's just natural. It's not a bad thing, but there are these listening skills you have to dial in a little different way, and you can learn that, you can refine that, and keep growing in that.
Can you talk about kind of a two-pronged, just virtual counseling in that world right now? Maybe what's that reality? Do you guys do virtual counseling? How effective is it? And what's the influence that social media has had on counseling and therapy?
Yeah. So I came in where I'm at now. I came in the COVID shutdowns, September 2020. So they had the counseling center had switched on a dime in a week from all in person to all virtual in March 2020. So our clinical team really went on this journey of not doing it at all to only doing it. And that was radical. It was radical for people. And I think it really, I'm sure there was different aspects for different people, but there would have been a lot of natural skepticism about how am I going to connect? Is it going to work? Can I connect? And lo and behold, a lot of people ended up feeling like they could connect in the space. I think to a much greater extent than if you would have done a pre-test and a post-test, done a little research, and you did a counselor pre-test and said, hey, you're going to start virtual counseling in a week. What are your thoughts about that? And did a post-test, you would see much more positive data in that than you would have expected. Much more positive attitudes about it, this and that. So there's that part. It went better than what people would have hoped it would have. And I had a lot of counselors then that wanted to stay partially remote. And I think it was two-pronged. One is hey, I can connect. And the lifestyle is they were okay with the lifestyle. And again, a lot of my counselors are a little introverted. So being at home and doing the home thing and seeing people, and even I felt pretty comfortable with it. But then I also loved getting back out too. And I run a lot of my meetings now in person. I do both. I do virtual meetings and in-person meetings, but I love my in-person meetings.
Just to be clear, do you have feedback from the clients though as to what they?
Yeah, there's again, it's similar. I think a lot of clients, it went better than they would have hoped. But at the same time, when our calls now, because I think, is it fair to say we're post-COVID? That's fair to say, right? We're not really thinking about it anymore in general, right? We're living our life. At this point, when people call us, they want in person. That's what they want in general, right? And there's probably some self-selection out of that. The big dogs are only virtual. The big national ones, BetterHelps and this and that. So they suck up some people maybe that are just looking for online because they've got the deep pockets, and that's what you see. You see BetterHelp, it pops up, bloop, okay, bloop. So it maybe self-selects out some people, but at this point, we get the folks that really love in person. And they want that. They want that personal connection. So, out of all that, I think, both can be effective, in person and virtual. Both can be effective. It depends on the client and what they want. So we just try to meet the client where they're at, what they want. We don't really care. I don't really care we can do both, and whatever works. It is amazing that it increased access, which that was a win. No matter what, is a win. And it's part of our lives, and I think that's okay.
You mentioned briefly, sorry guys, I have a question. You mentioned briefly earlier, The Body Keeps Score. I'm familiar with the book. And I actually just read, not too long ago, What Happened to You?
Okay.
And I'm curious if you have any other texts that would not just be for people in the field, but just general reads that people would find beneficial in their journey to self-healing and things like that.
Yeah, so the two worlds that I bring together in my work are really trauma-informed perspectives and emotionally focused therapy, EFT. Mm-hmm. EFT. So that's Dr. Sue Johnson. Dr. Sue Johnson. Hold Me Tight is one of those books. So that modality was originally crafted for couples counseling, but to me, it is super, super relevant. One of the things I say in my work is all roads lead to emotions. All roads lead to emotions. So that's my perspective. I have a bias. That's my perspective, right? So the work of EFT, it looks a lot at attachment theory, which ties into trauma and trauma defense. And I think the healing journeys mesh really well. So growing in your understanding in a bit. EFT is all about connecting to the deep self of another human being and what's preventing us from doing that. So those are the two things I often combine together in the bulk of my work.
I'm so sorry. The more questions that are asked, the more questions I develop. So if you were comfortable, you had talked about like the, I guess like the benefits, or maybe that's not a good way to phrase it, pros and cons, or just trials and tribulations of working in the addictions field. If you're comfortable, what is your professional take on reduction therapy?
Yeah, harm reduction.
Yes.
Harm reduction. Yeah. So this ties into medication-assisted treatment. And in modern, what that usually means now is that we're trying to treat someone that has an opioid use disorder. That's the main conversation around harm reduction. It exists in other aspects. It could be someone that was using alcohol in a really unhealthy way and wants to have moderate use. It could tie that same concept around any substance, marijuana, but the most intense version of that conversation is around opioid use disorder and treating that with medications. So if someone really wanted to do a deep dive in that, this is what I teach in my class at Messiah. They read Dying to Be Free, which was an investigative report about the treatment system in Kentucky. And that treatment system was totally abstinence-based. 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 12 months. But they had a real bias against harm reduction, a real bias against medication-assisted treatment. And their outcomes were horrible. People were just dying. So at some point, you gotta be real. You gotta be, okay, like I have this bias, but, am I gonna really look at what's going on? And so that report was very impactful, even at a policy level. At a national level, there were legislators that used that report to change laws, to make medication-assisted treatment more accessible. Because there was this thing where, as a physician, some people may have heard of Suboxone. This is a big part of the conversation, the buprenorphine products, right? So doctors could write prescription painkiller scripts all day. Script, no limit, right? But you were very limited into writing scripts to help people get off of those pills, medication-assisted treatment. So there was this culture right? So legislators eventually looked at that and helped modify that to where access to the treatment to get off the opioids got easier to access in that. So it's a huge part of the field, and it's a conversation we're still in, but we've really moved the needle a lot in the last 10 to 20 years towards being real about what the harms are and how can we mitigate harm without having the stigma as much. Like we're saying, okay, this is okay. We want that person to have a chance to make good choice, to move on with their life, right? Even Narcan pops up in this conversation. I've been in rooms back in some year, 10 years ago, even, it's not that long, where people were against Narcan being available, right? This is the overdose reversal drug. They say, oh, well, like you're enabling that person or something. Well, no, I want that person to be alive. I don't care about your conversation right now. I just want that person to be alive, and then we can figure out where we're going from there, right? So there is this stigma around a lot of these conversations, and we have gotten better, but the conversation continues.
And then my last question for now, I will stop asking questions after this one. It's kind of twofold. So during that virtual therapy, virtual appointment sessions, whatever have you, how effective or ineffective would you find EMDR activities or therapy practices, and then the Second part of the question is, what would you say is your favorite EMDR activity to kind of do in your sessions?
Yeah, so I think practitioners that really specialize in that would prefer to do in person in general. In COVID, I mean, people did what they could and they modified and they probably made it happen in that. That is a modality that, you know, if in person is possible, it's probably not a bad idea to consider it. But hey, if access is an issue and that's what works for you and you can do virtual and you can find someone to do it, hey, go for it. I don't care. So, and a little clarification, you know, I'm not a specialist in EMDR, right? So I don't use some of the nitty-gritty aspects of that modality is not a part of my practice. So I incorporate a lot of the trauma-sensitive stuff in a little bit more general way than doing the actual bilateral processing and everything like that. So if I ever put my just being a counselor hat on full time and that's all I do, then I probably would add those extra tools into my toolbox. But, yeah.
Fantastic. So that is actually all the time that we have together. I just want to say thank you so much just for your vulnerability and your insight. Honestly, it was just such a pleasure to get to talk with you today. So thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you.